Conciliation Committee will...
Well, welcome back. You're watching NBS, the Political Command Center. My name is Dalton Kawesa. The conversation that we're holding here is about narrowing the borrowing and improving on public pooling resources such that we fund these two sectors. Remember, the Bujak Declaration talks about 15% in the health sector. How far has your country gone? Those people that are watching us across the boundaries of Uganda, we have different stakeholders, and especially from civil society, that are participating in this talk. But also, most importantly, is the conference, Pan-African Conference that on public financing for health and road infrastructure that's taking shape in Entebbe started today, and it's going to be on tomorrow and the following day. Please make time. I don't know whether it's invite only. Let me put it to a gentleman that coming from Uganda Dead Network, and they are the people that are front runners of this conference. Is it by invite?
Yes, the conference is invite only, but also to add that it is a mix of several practitioners and academicians, so government, non-state actors, including the media and other civil society actors.
Okay, quickly before we engage here to go to infrastructure, I wanted to bring in Tirivangani about the PPP arrangement. Is it bearing fruits in the basin, southern basin? We're talking about Zimbabwe, Zambia, and all those sorts of countries.
Okay. A number of civil society research reports that have been done within the region, Sub-Saharan Africa region, and even in Europe, shows that it's mixed. There are failures, and in some cases there are successes. So basically, the private sector is a very important development player. They have huge resources that governments can leverage on, but also they are for profit. We should know that. Their motive in any partnership is to gain profits. So you find out that if they are not regulated, as my colleague here said, they don't bring out the intended benefits or result for the general public. We have seen PPPs in the energy sector, PPPs in the health sector, giving mixed results in terms of the user fees, the accessibility by the public, especially with their health centers. They become higher and expensive. If it's the energy sector, for example, people are not able to pay the fees that goes with that. We've also seen failed projects, which then results in the governments taking the burden in terms of contingent liabilities or the debts. And this is very rampant, not only in Africa, but even in the European countries. So PPPs, if they are not negotiated very well, and this is one of the challenges our governments have in terms of the capacity to negotiate quality PPPs, that then results in development impacts that we aspire to have. So it's very important that the government have the capacity to negotiate PPPs, contracts that benefit the citizens. But you know that these PPPs are pushed by the World Bank, for example. They are pushed by the G20 countries, the developed countries, through their own international companies of the private sector. I would love to see the African private sector playing a role more in some of these partnerships with our own governments, because somehow they know our challenges, they know our problems. But they have proved to be very expensive, especially to the public purse. They've also proved to be, if not regulated, they don't deliver, as there is a number of researchers have pointed to that. So it's really mixed, and we are yet to see PPPs that deliver some of the public goods or in the public interest. Yes.
Tirivangani says something that is very interesting, and Julius, I want to bring you to give us the Ghanaian context. He says he aspires to see the indigenous private sector participate. Is it the case? If not the case, what is lacking in your own country, Uganda?
Contextualizing the PPPs, as Tiri has indicated, they are, even the context of PPPs is not homegrown. It is coming from Washington. It is coming from Brussels, which is the headquarters of the European Union. What is the PPPs for you, the Africans, you and I? What form and format would we wish to see? Is the first point that we need to begin with, so that we know within these kinds of parameters that kind of private partnership into the public sphere is acceptable. This particular one is not acceptable. The other bit is that in the case of Uganda, even East African community as an example, except perhaps for a bit of Kenya, the private sector is still in its nascent stage. If you said, let's partner with the private sector and just open it up globally to whoever is able to come in, you are doing a disservice to the East Africans, you are doing a disservice to Ugandans. Yes, to the PPs, but the transparent mechanism in which that happens must be more known to us as the citizens, as the Mwananchi, and the governments also must do better homework. The other bit is that the private companies in our region, in our country, at this nascent stage, cannot be opened up for international bidding. We must protect them for now to get to a certain of, you've seen a child, you keep the child, stands up a bit, falls down, then I have twins, so I am a sarongo, as the Ugandans would say. So you hold the kid and falls down, and you can't, and if you say go to the pitch and play football, the other one who has lived 5 years older than this particular kid, definitely there will be a disadvantage to the other one who is younger. Okay. So we must come to that level. In the case of PPs in Uganda also, let's even go more practical and look at a particular example in the energy sector, Bujagari. At the heel of power shortages in Uganda, there was a discussion, I am hesitant to say rushed, but a discussion.
But Dr. Suma just admitted. For
a private company or companies to come and construct Bujagari hydropower. Today, out of Bujagari power, Ugandans, you and I, are paying excess of 11 cents for every unit of electricity consumed. With Isimba and Karuma, which are now state-owned, as opposed to the PPP's modality, we are paying about 7 cents, and President, after being sworn in, His Excellency Museveni, after being sworn in 2016, promised Ugandans that 7 cents will be pushed further down to 3 or 4 cents for every Ugandan, so that you can encourage production and growth of the sectors, including the private sector. It is that background that we need to come back to. So the PPPs are not necessarily a panacea to our development. You must come back to the fore on what type of PPPs we are talking about. There is the last for now, the bit of hybrid PPPs modality that we seem to see coming to the fore. This is the production sharing agreement.
Yes, Alfred, Julius, I will just walk into your tracks and bring in Ms. Ganawe on the issue of infrastructure. People would look at roads and they would look at, like he's talking about, hydro dam construction. One of the biggest stories that we've heard about Ethiopia is about the dam, but we'll visit that later. The infrastructure in this country, for instance, the president or the authorities think that it's an enabler. You have to heavily invest in it in order to jumpstart the economy. What is the experience in Ethiopia, and how has it worked?
The infrastructure? Infrastructure,
yes. What is the story in Ethiopia? Is it emphasis on infrastructure, and has it worked in order to improve the citizens in Ethiopia?
Yes, the infrastructure is we can cover most of we can connect most of the country, one city to each other city, you know. We have good infrastructure, so it's making life better for citizens. And the question we have is, when we talk about infrastructure, we are not putting safety measures on the roads. So we have road research that was funded by World Bank. It was in 2016. There was a gravel road in southern Ethiopia, which is 120 kilometers. And that road, before it paved well, there was no accident. The accident was very low. And the government got the fund to construct that road. So after the road built, well, it was only for the cars that that road, become very comfortable. But the pedestrians were left behind, houses, and there is no enough signs on the roads. Yeah, the infrastructure was very poor. I mean, beside the road. So in the economical aspect, it makes people, to better their life. So.
Is it maybe to be, before I come to Diane, in Ethiopia, the road construction that has improved people's lives, one would ask, how did the government fund it? How did it affect the funding of the common person, if it did anyway? A quick one.
It didn't affect any person. It's only making life better especially for the people in the rural area.
All right.
So the people could able to get transportation easily
and
to go to hospital. Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes. Diane, I come to you. The president of this country has emphasized infrastructure development. There are people who claim, there's a school of theory that claims that infrastructure alone does not transform an economy, that you should place emphasis first somewhere before you deal with the infrastructure. I want to pick your mind on that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with that theory. That is, if it is handled very well. For a number of years, we have seen our government allocate big chunks of money towards infrastructure, road construction, and all that. But this has been at the cost of social services in Uganda, that while we have seen a lot of money being allocated to infrastructure, education and health, I mean, they've been falling apart. So we have been discussions in terms of how to balance infrastructure development and providing social services in Uganda. So I think it's high time that government withdraws and starts balancing in terms of how it deals with allocations towards infrastructure, but at the same time, improving the social services within the sector. When you talk about, for example, roads, I'll talk about the highways that have been constructed. Yes, they are good, and to some extent they have facilitated services in Uganda. But when you talk about the social services like health and education, they're inside, like in villages, and you have seen the feeder roads within villages. They do not facilitate services, for example, health services, like the referral system. And it cannot work if we have the feeder roads within the villages where our people are doing badly. If you look at, for example, I talked about the allocations and how it's done. All that money stays at the central government, and local governments are limited in terms of how much money they have to improve the roads that will improve the social services. So we are looking at government in terms of revisiting on appropriation of funds to enable local governments be able to put up good infrastructure that will also facilitate social services in Uganda, especially the areas of health and education.
Okay, Tirivangani, infrastructure has been looked at a big contributory factor to economic growth. But within it comes because African governments cannot facilitate or fund such roads. It has brought about heavy debt burden. Yes, how do these nations try to flip and ensure that they fund the road while in quest for better services to their country?
Yeah, that's a very important question. But firstly, let me point out that yes, infrastructure in Africa, there's a huge deficit in terms of infrastructure. And according to the African Development Bank, they are saying that the region or sub-Saharan Africa, they need almost $108 billion. There is that deficit. And infrastructure is needed as an enabler for economic growth. Hence the need for government to invest in it. Yes, there's consensus that the resources domestically are not enough, whether at the national level or the regional level, they are not enough. Hence, we see a number of our African countries going to borrow outside the country. There are infrastructure projects, for example, within the energy sector, within the tourism sector, for example. If you talk to the tourism sector, they will tell you we need airports because they enable the tourists to visit different sites, and it's very important for them. So yes, government have resorted to borrowing outside the country to finance most of these projects, whether they are roads, energy projects, and they come at a huge cost. But I think what is important is to realize that, yes, when you borrow, obviously the debt levels rise, but we have to remain within sustainable levels. And we have to invest in productive projects and not political projects, as we have seen in some of the countries. We have a road that is going to nowhere. I think that's not proper. There has to be done what we call project financing analysis. What are the costs and benefits of funding these projects from external debt, for example, versus domestic resources? I think these are all key decisions that our government at different levels need to play, because the debt that will come with failed projects will hit hard citizens, because it is only through taxation that we repay these debts. And when we fail to repay, there are consequences and there are risks associated with bad debts, for example. And projects should not fail based on poor forecast or poor use of the end products in terms of the infrastructure projects. So it is very important that government have a clear strategy in how they finance infrastructure projects. Is it going to be through debt? If they look to domestically on other sources, for example, we have pension funds, we have remittances from the diasporas, for example, and we have other cheap sources of funding. I know in Africa, a lot of our governments are borrowing from China, but they need to be responsible in their borrowing from China, for example. Look at the terms and conditions of those loans, look at the project themselves, the returns and the gains. And I think if we have a responsible borrowing culture within our governments, the project, especially the infrastructure project, will deliver development impacts to the citizens.
All right,
yes.
I really want this conversation to really continue, but my time is fast when we're getting into the bulletin, but I cannot go away without engaging you, Julius, because we need to also speak to the real conference that is going to. But before we go to that, I'll give you everyone a chance to speak about the conference. Julius, Tsvangani mentions very critical areas about sustainable borrowing, about not political borrowing. In this country, the policy regime seems to suggest that we should not stop, we are not going to stop borrowing soon. Yes? Are there alternatives?
Every borrowing is political, so we won't run away from that. We are seeking for political responsibility, responsive and responsible, not simply because it is political. And the other bit is, yes, we could do something. One of the strategies, for instance, in the case of Uganda, is to provide room for our own indigenous companies to grow. Let's have a bank for small enterprises, specifically for construction areas, so that we are able to get money that can help us. But also let roads be linked consciously, as Karl Marx says, to other programs. If you have a brand, Kampala Entebbe Express, what is it exactly carrying beyond carrying guests and the VIPs to the airport? How much of agricultural produce, how much of our meat and flowers are going to the airport to find the market so that we can get revenue? And also maybe, lastly for now, that we invite Ugandans as Uganda Debt Network. We are grateful to...
Why Uganda? Why Uganda hosting this conference?
Uganda Debt Network is one of the ingenious institutions that we have in this country, indigenous and homegrown. And we think it imperative that oftentimes we bring people of alike minds and government and also diverse of minds together to discuss how do we liberate ourselves as African people from the yoke of poverty, from the yoke of neocolonialism, from the yoke of impoverishment. So we'll continue to that discussion, sponsoring other meetings.
Yes, I'm giving you a chance, Ms. Gamani. What do you hope to pick from this conference?
I hope that African governments, African leaders need to reevaluate the privatization. It should be seen, you know, we need to have at least few companies that we owned ourselves to finance.
Thank you very much. Then 10 seconds. I'm being pushed out of this.
Yes. Out of this whole discussion in regards to health, right now Uganda is in discussions around the national health insurance. So if we are speaking about universal health coverage, I think it's high time that Uganda gives the national health insurance focus.
Yes.
However, there's some of the issues that I have read in the bill in terms of the poor benefiting from the insurance. I'm scared what was tabled in Parliament only considers those in formal and informal sector, and I have not seen the poor being catered for. So we need to go out there and we speak to that.
Thank you very much, Diana Tibesigwa from World Vision. I had Ms. Ganawe from the Executive Director of Save the Nation from Ethiopia. Thank you for making time. I also applaud Mr. Tirivangani from Zambia for making Zimbabwe, I beg your pardon, for making time. I applaud Diana once again, and also Julius Kapepwa for Uganda Date Network. This conference is sponsored. There are different sponsors, including Democratic Governing Facility
and then Church Aid.
Thank you for visiting. Please make time to follow. I know it will be put across Twitter for you to follow the conversation that is going on, and Facebook. My name is Dalton Kawesa. Thank you for being part of this conversation. I'll hand you over to Samson Kasumba, who's coming up with Live at 9.